Good Friday afternoon, Neurofeedback moms. I am Miriam Bellamy. I am the mom who started this group. I'm the director of Whole Family Neurofeedback. I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist and met, 10 or 15 years ago, very dear friend and colleague, Keira Oseroff, who I have with me today. We are doing a series I haven't done in a long time. It's called Getting the Most Out of Neurofeedback. It's an understanding that neurofeedback is one part of the journey. It doesn't solve all of our problems. But Keira also practices neurofeedback. We do the same nonlinear neurofeedback. And we're going to be talking today about eating and feeding, which is an issue I know for lots of families in this group with complex kids. I have complex kids, and eating and feeding has been an issue just about from the get-go. But Keira is an LCSW, that's a licensed clinical social worker. She's a certified eating disorder specialist. She has served on the board of the International Association of Eating Disorder Professionals. She's a childhood feeding expert. You're on the Ellen Satter Institute faculty since 2014. That is an internationally recognized practice that specializes in how to feed your kids. And Ellen Satter has done pretty extraordinary work, and so does Keira Oseroff. So thank you so much, Keira, for doing this with me.
Really welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Happy to spend a Friday afternoon with you. This is just going to be good for me, always. Get some really good information from Keira, always. So Keira and I did a podcast a couple of years ago, which I can put the link down below in the comments after the fact. But I wanted to review just a little bit. It was such a rich podcast. If you do get a chance, if you have children where feeding is an issue, listen to that podcast. You will walk away with practical information. You'll walk away being challenged to think differently about food. So one of the things, we'll review this first. One of the things that Keira emphasized was we get really fixated on what we're supposed to eat and what we're not supposed to eat. And Keira emphasized that we focus on what, but she invites people to think about how. And do you want to just sort of briefly say what does that mean? What's the how of eating here and feeding our kids?
Sure. I mean, I think you said it really well, that we are obsessed, very preoccupied, to say the least, with what we eat. And we're, bombarded with information all over the place that focuses on what we're, eat this, not that. And what we really have neglected to do is to address the relationship that we have with food, which is how we say it's the how of eating. How do we feed ourselves? How do we feed our kids? And it's a very important thing to address before we get to the what. I'm not saying that the what is not important ultimately, but we can't successfully deal with the what until we've dealt with the how.
I couldn't agree more. And you also emphasized, and I want to put this out there too, the how is not just that one person eating. It's our first relationship, right? Is the mother feeding the child or the father feeding the child, and the communication that goes around eating and feeding, and how when we have complex kids, how twisted up that can get, how confused and jumbled. It absolutely happened in my family with one of my kids. So
yeah, that's how we learn trust, that we're consistently going to get taken care of. Mm-hmm. And so we learn to trust our caregivers. Mm-hmm. And hopefully they learn to listen to us when we turn our head from a nipple or from a spoon, because we don't want any more. Mm-hmm. And that is a relationship. Right?
Yes, and let me add, because with complex kids, they can be very confused about their eating, their hunger signals, and their satiation. Yeah. I won't go into with my daughter, but she was never hungry. There was never in the first few days, because there was some medical intervention that shut that system down a little bit, and then all of a sudden she started eating, and it was screaming, right? All night screaming, and so that got very jumbled up between the two of us. Between the three of us, I'll say. My husband was there too.
But I love hearing that the drive to eat kicked in for her.
Mm-hmm.
There, and I know I don't want to get ahead. We're going to talk about these
Yes, we are.
drives. So yes, there are things that interfere with the signals, and
Mm-hmm.
those things have to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, and that's the other piece that you really emphasized in that initial podcast. And I'm not going to review everything, but the enjoyment of food is essential to being nourished.
mhm. Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about that?
Sure. You had asked me when we were talking about doing part two if I could expand on this idea that we have a biopsychosocial drive. Um, there are drives, right? And the first drive is hunger and the drive to survive. We have that.
So
That
that would be the
is
biological drive to eat,
that
hunger.
is we are programmed, genetically programmed to survive. And we do that through food. So there is a hunger that needs to be satisfied. Appetite, right? That's the need for pleasure, right? And satiety. That is a biological
Mm.
drive.
Mm-hmm.
That is a biological drive.
I think that
Um,
would be helpful for the type A's who might be listening today. There is a biological need for pleasure.
yes,
I think that's
yes.
super powerful.
There is a biological need for pleasure with
Mm-hmm.
food
Mm-hmm.
and with other things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That is that is a basic human
Mm-hmm.
drive. The need for social reward, and we do that with food and community.
Mm-hmm.
That is a psychological and a social drive that is in the very um, um, losing my words, the fabric of our DNA.
Mm-hmm.
It's there. Um, and there's a biological propensity to maintain a stable body weight. So, when there's this up and down, we talk about set point and that when we diet and then it's so hard to maintain and then we gain plus some. People talk about that because of this drive to maintain a stable body weight
Mm-hmm.
so that we're prepared for famine when it comes again, whether famine is real famine or it's self-imposed famine, which is deprivation and restriction, dieting.
Yeah, so that because that's a big part of what we wanted to talk about today is we're talk about a lot in the first podcast about feeding our kids, but there is this relationship between our relationship with food and how we feed ourselves and how we feed our kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about today our relationship with food. So you bring up dieting and you bring up this social aspect. Can you talk about how those intersect? Does that make sense, that question?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I
Well,
understand
I'm
the
thinking
question.
about dieting as a very isolating. It makes it hard to go to a restaurant, right? Potentially,
Potentially,
and hang out with friends.
potentially, it's definitely can make it difficult to share the same food. So when we talk about a family meal,
Yeah.
and with complex kids, a lot of people find themselves short order cooking for their kids. So even if caregivers, parents are not on a diet, sometimes kids are eating something different than the rest of the family.
Mm.
So, and I'm not saying that our kids don't have some special needs that require and call for accommodation, but there's a difference between being accommodating and catering to
Mm.
those preferences. And so, when we just talk about the family meal, which is
Mm.
where we learn how to behave, we learn how to take turns in conversation, we learn how to develop competency with regard to feeding ourselves, using utensils, um, managing a cup. We learn all of that at the table, and we learn it through observation. So, when parents make meal for the kids and they feed the kids and they wait till later to eat, kids miss out, for example, on practicing taking turns with conversation,
Mm.
pass the potatoes or the peas or the whatever it is that we're passing.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much that happens during a family meal.
Mm.
And when the family meal is fraught with stress and anxiety because of experiences that have shaped us, that we can anticipate that there's going to be a power struggle or a meltdown, or it's going to be difficult, and we interfere in um, this healthy exchange of, to go back to the very first thing we were talking about, developing trust, right? That trusting that our
Mm.
kids
Mm.
know how to eat, that they know that they want to eat, that they want to enjoy food, and trusting them to know what it is
Mm.
that they need and want, and trusting them to eat the right amount for them. And then we interfere in that. Um, what a healthy relationship looks like, feeding relationship, is a division of responsibility. So we talk about Satter's division of responsibility, and that
Mm.
is that parents are responsible for the what, the when, and the where. And children are responsible for whether and how much.
Mm.
So parents decide what's being offered, where it's being offered, and when. And our job as parents is to be reliable and consistent and dependable
Mm-hmm.
with food.
And
And
maybe not too stressed out when we come to the dinner table.
well, I mean, one of the reasons we talk about the whole family training their
Mm.
brains is because
Mm.
our energy is such a huge influence and so impactful on the
Mm.
functioning of our kids. We've got to get
Mm.
ourselves
Mm.
under control. We've
Mm.
got to get centered. We've got to get calm, not act
Mm-hmm.
calm, but like be calm.
Mm-hmm. So
And
that's where, just aside, then talking about neurofeedback, right, is yeah. So how do you look at neurofeedback for the family then?
I mean, and that's why I recommend that when I'm working with really any of my clients and with any range of issues or work they want to do,
Mm-hmm.
neurofeedback is helpful. But specifically with my specialty, bringing
Mm-hmm.
down the anxiety that gets in the way and interferes in that relationship of feeding,
Mm-hmm.
that's the goal. That's the aim, is that everybody is calmer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
It just supports this process of.
it supports the process, because where the problems come from, where all of this stress and meltdowns and difficulty comes from, is interference in the feeding dynamic, interference in
Mm.
where parents are either trying to do too much of the kid's job, like telling them whether or not they're going to eat and how much of it they're going to eat. You
Mm-hmm.
can't leave the table until you have 3 bites of this. You can't have that until you eat this. You can't have seconds of this until you eat that. Um, are you sure you don't want more? Are you
Mm-hmm.
sure you need that? That's too much.
Mm.
All of this.
Or the other side that you mentioned in the
Yep.
first video, right,
Yep.
is where I have tended, which is I get too loose and don't have a
Yep.
family meal and don't have it ready and don't have the supplies I need to make whatever meal.
Right. And so again, there's not this consistent
Mm.
opportunity to practice internal regulation, to know my hunger and fullness cues, to be reliable and dependable about getting fed, to be exposed to variety,
Mm-hmm.
right? Opportunities to
Mm-hmm.
learn how to sneak up on new foods and learn to like them or not. And just generally to feel good about eating, for that to be an enjoyable experience.
So when we as parents are either restrictive of ourselves or of the kids' diets,
Hmm.
say more about that, because we did talk about this, I guess, a little bit in the first one about what if a doctor says this child can't have gluten or sugar or red dye number 5 or and
Well,
whatnot.
the reality is that there are kids, and I mean, we have challenges or dietary restrictions. There are allergies. Um, we have children who might be diabetics. I mean, they may have celiac. Um, there are definitely situations where there are things that are off limits or that need to be controlled or regulated. And so we need to find opportunities where our kids have um, power and control. And so we need to still practice a division of responsibility. It's going to look a little bit different. So, you know, that will look a little bit different. But
So let's
teaching our kids how
really punctuate that, the division of responsibility. You said it, what it was, but say it one more time. The parents are responsible for what?
for the what, meaning what is offered, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
we decide what's on the menu.
Mm-hmm.
As kids get older, so let me say this too, the division of responsibility changes. So
Mm-hmm.
the amount of responsibility a child takes on increases over time, so that when they're adolescents and getting ready to fly the coop, they can prepare a meal for themselves. They know how to get a meal to the table.
Mm-hmm.
So that does change over time. But when we're talking about
Okay.
from toddler on,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about the what. So I know, you know, with input, maybe I know what they like, I know what they don't like, but generally speaking, I know what I'm making and what's on the table.
Mm-hmm.
I know where we're getting takeout from, or I know where we're going to eat tonight.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be a restaurant. So I know I'm choosing that this is the menu we're going to be eating off of.
Mm-hmm.
That's the what. The when is making sure we are reliable and dependable. So for our little ones who are busy playing, we don't let them skip a meal and get too hungry where they're going to have a meltdown. We
Mm-hmm.
say, little Jimmy, it's time for a snack. And, we wait for the video to be done or the playtime to be over. And then we direct that, the when,
Mm-hmm.
so that, again, we're reliable and consistent and dependable with feeding. Just like when we have a diaper bag, when our kids are really small, where you're thinking about, how long am I going to be gone? How many bottles do I need? How many diapers you plan for
Yes.
that. So
And let me throw in there, if as a parent, because this has been me, if you're really stressed about food and what to eat and what, I've got a lot of health things that have happened over the years, that can be very stressful. It's not just throwing a diaper in a bag. It's what can I eat? What can I not eat? I eat meat. My husband is vegetarian. What, right? so again, just thinking about this neurofeedback piece, this is where we both really emphasize, let's get mom and dad or whoever, whatever adult in the family is, hooked up to the neurofeedback. This isn't a, I think we have to be very careful when we just want to do neurofeedback for the child, to get them to eat or whatever we want them to do.
I look, I think it's very helpful for our kids when they do neurofeedback. It's more helpful for me when I do neurofeedback.
Yes.
And it's more helpful for them when I do neurofeedback. Because
Yeah.
if I'm still fraught with anxiety over what they're going to eat or not eat,
Or when, or do I have the supply? All of the
I
stuff.
I am more likely to interfere with them doing their job and learning to trust that they can do their job,
Mm.
which is whether or not they're going to eat,
Mm-hmm.
and how much of it they're going to eat.
That is up to them.
Up to them.
So,
Now,
Keira, tell me this.
dessert is the caveat. Dessert's the caveat. There is one serving for everybody.
Okay.
Okay? So, other than that, I don't, we don't limit whatever's on the table unless it's an issue of, you know, money, right? We
Mm.
can't have, let's say we're not going to make, 3 racks of lamb. Like it's it's not, there are financial constraints a lot of times, and everybody's got a share of something, right? But we do have things on the table that are going to be abundant, and usually that's whatever culture, that's your bread, right? So
Mm.
bread, tortillas, rice, pasta, potatoes, every culture has their abundant source of energy.
Mm-hmm.
So and
So,
that's
I want
all,
to
but
say what you're speaking to me is this family meal thing. And Ellen, the Satter Institute has a particular concept of what that is, and not everybody maybe knows about that. So, I think it solves a lot of problems when family members have different requirements. Like I said, my husband is a vegetarian. Now, I'm
yeah.
not quite as big of a meat eater now, but talk about, yeah, I think that solves a lot. Go ahead. What's the family meal concept?
The family meal is that we sit down and we enjoy the same food. Now, again, there
Mm.
are there can be accommodations made. So with kids that are that might struggle with textures or things like that, we might not combine foods for them. Maybe things are more deconstructed. But like,
Okay.
you know, so we might let everybody combine that for themselves, or maybe they don't want as much dressing on there because it's soggy, or
Mm.
they can dip if they want to, and so we don't pour sauce on everything, that
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. We might make that's an example of accommodation.
Okay.
But for example, with you guys, if you guys are doing fajitas, you
Mm-hmm.
may not
So,
put
what we do
them
with
in,
tacos. Yeah.
right? Tacos, fajitas, there are
Everybody has a
ways.
lot of choices.
But you're all sharing the same food because everybody
Right.
can, and it can't be perfect like that all the time, but there's no reason that David has to eat the protein source
Right.
on the table because there's other things to choose from. So I think
And this
when
is that, I keep interrupting you, I'm sorry, but
Sorry,
I get excited when I talk to you.
that's the
Huh?
what, because I decide what's going on the table, or
Yes.
whoever's making dinner decides
Well,
what's
but
going
you're
on.
also referencing again this biocycle social drive to eat.
Yeah,
There's this need to eat together and eat the same things or be drawing from the same pool of foods.
it's sharing because
Yeah.
we're sharing. We're sharing in that
Mm.
experience.
Mhm.
We're
So,
sharing. Yeah.
maybe people are listening like me who did not do a great job of the family meal and their
Hmm.
kids are older. What do they do? Is it too late?
What do they do about what?
Family meal. Their kids are 12 and 15 or something, and they've never done the
Yeah.
family meal. It's been too stressful.
Well, I think you bring up a great point, is that there are a lot of barriers to family meals. And one of the barriers is what we think it is supposed to be. It needs to be healthy.
Ah.
It needs to be perfect. It needs to be every night for dinner. It needs, like, we just need to
I think
start
all of
somewhere.
those
We
things.
need to start somewhere. A family meal doesn't have to be dinner. A family meal can be a snack we share together. Just pick a time.
Mm.
That's it. That's it. It's not going to be perfect, and you can't go back. You cannot go back
Mm.
and do it again.
Mm-hmm.
We can't go back. We
Mm-hmm.
just start from where we are right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that's breakfast on Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's dinner on Sunday night.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we say,
And
you know what, you guys, you're off here, you're off there, you're going here, you're going there. And that's the way that life is, and that's
Yeah.
okay. But we're going to find one time this week where we're going to come together and we're going to eat together. One
And
time.
that's a good starting point, is that once a
It's
week.
an excellent starting point.
Yeah. One of the things that would trip me up is, especially Hannah with long COVID this year, is she was never hungry.
Right.
And so I quit making the effort because I'm going to cook this food and nobody's going to eat it. But then I listened to our first podcast. It was like, it doesn't matter. It was a really nice reminder. It doesn't matter whether they eat. Just gather around the table and you can chat and whatever.
It does make sense to ask. It's not, it could be a fruitful exercise to ask, why is nobody eating? A lot of times, I don't think this is the case with you because I've tasted your food and your food tastes good. But sometimes food doesn't taste good,
Okay.
right? Like we give the kids, and again, this could be because we're dieting or because we think it needs to be healthy or whatever, and it doesn't taste good. Like we need to use some butter and we need to use some salt. We need to use some cheese if there's not a dietary restriction or reason.
Those are my favorite ingredients, butter and salt.
Why not make the food taste good? It needs to taste good. Kids don't want to eat if it doesn't taste good.
And we're back to, I think the reason my kids love broccoli is because there is no shortage of butter and salt that goes on my broccoli. They love broccoli.
They love broccoli, right? Baby trees.
Baby trees.
That's what my kids called them, baby trees.
Very good.
They were very excited about baby trees.
So it's not too late to start something around gathering around the table, having that time as a family, understanding what your job is, what your responsibilities are, what, when, and when.
What,
right?
When, and where.
And where. And the kids do not have to eat.
Ideally not in front of the TV, right? That's the where. We're going to sit at the table, or we're going to have a picnic, or we're going to go out to,
Could that be a place to start? In front of the TV? If a family's not doing it at all, could that be one?
If they're not doing it at all, then they don't have to start that way. They have a unique opportunity to create it the way that they'd like it to be. Usually this is how it happens, and we're trying to wean off of that.
Okay.
Because a lot of times when kids have texture issues or whatever the challenges are, parents describe it being helpful to have their kids distracted, that they will just eat when they're distracted with video or something like that. And that's how they get them to eat. And they might be just getting them to eat, but they're not aware of what they're eating. They're not tuned in. So makes it much more difficult to learn the hunger and fullness cues, to be in touch with when I'm done, and just to be paying attention and enjoying. And so it's not ideal.
Gotcha. I could almost see, and you tell me if I'm off here, but I could almost see it as if a family's got some competency around this, around eating together. There could be some flexibility where they're going to watch their favorite show.
Yes.
Once a month, once a week, whatever, and they're all laughing together and they can see each other. I don't know.
Totally. It doesn't have to be so rigid when there's competency. Everything is flexible. I love that you brought that up. The very common theme, like now, like popular thing to do is go to the movies, and it's dinner and a movie. It's like movie tavern, or I don't know what you have there, but so you're eating and watching. I mean, that's fun, and it's not like we're never allowed to do that.
Okay. I have a memory a childhood memory of, we get TV dinners and we get to eat in front of the TV. It's a really happy memory. So I was like,
my kids always thought that's what it meant, a TV dinner, that you eat dinner in front of the TV. They didn't know that there was a thing called TV dinners.
That scary stuff in the fridge, in the freezer.
Yeah, they didn't know.
I love it. Okay. So thinking about your own level of stress and worry about food, your own rigidity about what and so on, I think this idea of the family meal, putting everything on the table, right? So people can choose and eat together. And that is just a biopsychosocial. It is a drive. It's inherent. Super helpful, Keira. So any final thoughts you want to put in there?
Just enjoyed being with you, as
Yep.
usual.
You too, always. So if people want to be in contact with Keira, you can email her at Keira, and I'm going to put this in the comments, Keira at KeiraOseroff.com. I'll put it in the comments. I'll put the podcast in the comments. But yeah, you can ask questions privately on her email, or our group is a private group, private Facebook group, as private as Facebook is. So you can ask your questions there as well if you have any for Keira. Thank you so much, Keira, and thanks for those who listened in today. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.